Welcome to another episode of the Trailblazers Experience podcast, the podcast where we have candid conversations with women sharing their career stories and career journeys. Today, I'm really excited to have my next guest, and I feel it's a bit of serendipity because we're involved in a very interesting project together as well, which is all about celebrating women in business, and it'll come to light in the conversation today. But today I have Michaela Weber, who's the Senior VP of Business Development at BigCommerce. She's had an illustrious career spanning over 15, 20 years and has worked across FinTech, e-commerce, anything that has to do with the tech sector. She's been there and looking forward to this journey and this story. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Nicola. I'm thrilled to be here.
So we were talking earlier on about how important it is to talk about your career journey and your early years because it brings to light that life is a journey. Your career is a journey in itself, and it always has ups and downs and twists and turns that have sort of led you to the role that you're in now. Do you want to sort of share about your early years of where you're from and your experience and what sort of led to your own reflection, patting yourself on the back as a senior VP?
Sure. So I grew up in Cape Cod, so outside of Boston in kind of the suburbs. And my mother's a landscape architect. My dad's in construction. So not a lot of FinTech or finance in my family. And went to a small women's university actually in Western Massachusetts called Smith, and loved that experience. As part of college, or I guess a U.S. university, you're always thinking about what am I going to do after? And I was actually a government major and a German minor, which does not give your parents confidence that you'll ever
What an interesting combination. Yes.
have a well-paying job. And I kind of hit my junior year, didn't know what to do. And there was a woman who lived across the hall from me who was going to work in sales and trading at Bank of America. And her name's Amy. And she was super nice. And she was like, oh, I've got this great new job. It's super interesting. And I stayed in touch with her. And then when I was thinking about what to do, she helped get my resume to the top of the pile. I went down for, a full super day of interviews to New York and got an offer. And all of a sudden I had an offer to go work on Wall Street because of, my network and this woman who was working there who knew me and we were friendly. So that was, I think, my first exposure to the power of networking and the ability to kind of get your resume out of the pile and into the top, at least to give you a chance to pitch. I had no business working with a trading floor.
I was going to say, how was day one when you actually started the job and saying, what am I doing here?
So I actually deferred for 1 year because I got a Fulbright teaching fellowship to go to Germany for a year. So I lived in Western Germany in the Saarland, which is a very small little area along the border with France, and taught disinterested German fifth graders English. And that was actually, I think, still probably one of my hardest jobs I've ever had, teaching especially like rowdy groups of middle schoolers. So went and did that and then came back and started on Wall Street. And I was analyst class 2008. So I started in June 2008. And my first day fully licensed on the desk was the Monday after Lehman Brothers collapsed.
Oh, my days.
So it was total chaos. I didn't know. I had a new apartment. I was sharing with two girls that I knew, was here in New York, had this big job, had these very boxy Brooks Brothers kind of suits because I thought that's what I needed to wear. And it was total turmoil for the first 6 or 7 months as the financial crisis unfolded. And ultimately, my analyst class was laid off in March 2009. So I had gone from having this mental image of working in a role for 2 years, getting promoted, working for 3 years, getting promoted, living in New York, having this life. And now I had to figure out how to pay my rent. And it was really unsettling. And I was unemployed for a few months. And then through some people I knew at BAML, got interviewed at this place that was selling research on Chinese companies to hedge funds. And so went and worked in this unfinished office for very little money because I needed a job. So within the span of 12 months, I had gone from this like picture perfect Wall Street career to really kind of scrapping it out, and had a great boss. That role actually brought me to Hong Kong. And then I moved to JP Morgan at Hong Kong. So I got recruited to JP. So I was kind of back on a more traditional bank track, worked in the sales and trading there. But it was definitely not the first career trajectory that I expected. When you come out of university, you think that everything's going to be smooth sailing and your career is just going to look like up and to the right the whole way.
Yeah, so it's different sector industry, going from a government to a German minor and then being plunged into a financial crisis and then being made redundant. I mean,
Yeah.
getting fired from your first job is like the worst thing ever, isn't it? You have that roller coaster of saying, was it me? Could I have done anything better? Do you think there was a lot of you being curious and open to new opportunities that led you to your first role, second role, and then obviously moving to Hong Kong?
Yes, I think the first role, so going to kind of work in New York it was almost a comfort decision because I knew someone who liked it, and I think that's, you think, I like Amy likes this, I should like this. But it was being open to going to live in New York. I always thought I was going to go back and live in Boston. That's here where my family is. And then I think I was just a bit upended with the redundancy, and it led me to take a series of probably higher risk decisions than I would have. And the Hong Kong move, someone gave me great advice, which was, look, what is the cost of failure? If you fly over there, you're there for a month, you don't like it, you just buy a plane ticket and come home. It's a two-way door decision, right? It's not irreversible. And I thought about that a lot the first couple months because it is so different. It was my first time in Asia. And it ended up being an amazing 3 years, which I really loved and still have a great network from that time. But taking that push to go and live halfway across the world, I don't think I would have done if I hadn't been in a situation where I really needed to keep a job and was more open to taking new opportunities than maybe I would have been.
Yeah, a lot to be said about what's the worst that can happen, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you were there for 3 years and then you went back to New York. Was that like, I don't like Asia anymore, I'm moving back? What happened?
So I moved back to the US to do my MBA. And my boss at the time at JP Morgan was very against graduate education. So his view of
why?
Yeah, because he was a sales and trading guy, and he didn't think I needed it. Had gotten an early VP promotion, and his view was, why would you pay money to not work? That's his assessment of grad school. And so I definitely was a little wobbly leaving this good job that I had. JP is an amazing company, to take a step back. But because I had this weird German government background, I didn't have a lot of hardcore finance. And I felt that I wanted to go back and do an MBA, take a breath because so much had happened that was unexpected, and really shore up some of my financial skills, my strategy skills, and see if I could then get into a more traditional finance job. So I did go back. I went to Dartmouth for my MBA. And as a result of that, ended up at Goldman Sachs in their global investment research team in New York. So back in New York with a more stable job this time, but doing financial analysis on companies, working in the oil and gas sector, which was totally new to me, but they kind of take you as an associate and just drop you wherever they need a body. So I didn't have a lot of choice in terms of what desk I was going to be assigned to, and ended up learning so much and really loved it. But that was another huge curveball where if you had told me 5 years before I'd be doing oil and gas and LNG research, I never would have believed you.
Yeah, there's something to be said about you also wanted that credibility, isn't it? Where you had the experience, but you wanted to say, right, I have a stamp of approval, an MBA, which means I belong in this industry, and no one can ever take that away from you. So it probably was a right move in terms of solidifying that. Because I find a lot of the time is I didn't study tech or digital, but I worked sort of this thing where I started off in fashion and then ended up in the IT digital sector because it was like a dirty word. Oh, those are the people doing e-commerce. Those are the people. But because it was an industry, it was a sector that was growing, that was building up. And it's only now in hindsight where I've worked from an educational perspective that getting that stamp of approval, that degree to say, right, this is the statement that I actually am qualified to be in this industry. But your work experience actually speaks more for itself in most cases. It's an interesting world we live in. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the MBA, for me, it was given kind of that it set me on a different trajectory. It was really the right decision. And I met my husband and all these things. So on a personal and professional level, I really loved it. But I do think there's a lot to be said for just getting the work experience. And if you can do it without grad school, I mean, I think about my role now, which I know we'll get into, but there's no grad school for the things I'm doing now, right? There's a little bit of business acumen, there's a little bit of financial analysis, there's a bit of strategy, but most of it is figuring things out on the fly. So I don't think you need it, but for some people it is helpful depending on your background.
Yeah. So oil and gas wasn't really tickling your fancy because clearly you're not doing that anymore.
No. So what happened, another like classic curveball is that my husband was relocated to London in 2017. So so that was how I ended up moving over to London. So I ended up needing to find a new role, which through my network, I ended up at Bain and Company. I had a lot of MBA classmates who were there and thought that I'd done all this work studying the financial analysis of companies. I want to actually see strategy and I want to kind of get inside companies and figure out how they tick. And it was an amazing opportunity to be at Bain. And that's really where I started working in payments and FinTech in their private equity group and with some digitization projects. So that was really the key catalyst for me to kind of bridge over from old school finance to the new modern FinTech and payments world.
So that was stability in a way, because we all know Bain is a stable company. It's been around for a lot of years. And then you drop the bomb and decide to join Molly. It's like...
So WorldPay was in between. So WorldPay came through my network. There was a role there to run their commercial partnerships team and build out. And, it was an early time to leave Bain. I think I could have definitely stayed at Bain for a number of additional years.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed like, again, an opportunity where one of the partners at Bain who I was close to said, look, if you don't like it, just come back. Like we'll take you back. You're great. And so I felt really confident taking that step, knowing that I had a bit of a safety net. If I didn't like it or it didn't work out, that I could probably fall back and go back to consulting at Bain. So I was at WorldPay, and then through that, one of my leaders who ran our e-commerce business, he went to be CEO at Molly. So he asked me to come over to run the partner team. So went from WorldPay, which was part of FIS, 40,000 people, had worked at these big orgs, to Molly, which was 1,000 people, very scrappy, new market entrant, a lot of product, not a lot of process. And so it was definitely a really interesting opportunity for me to be in more of a startup environment.
Do you think now, connecting the dots and talking about your career, has it all been strategic for you in terms of, I'm going to do this to get to that next level, and now I'm interested in this? Did you, as you were in each role, did you then pinpoint and say, I think the next 2 years could look like this, or the next 3 years? Or were you just curious and open to new opportunities every few years?
I would like to say that it was super strategic, but I think not always. Right. I wanted to go, consistently went to work for leaders that I liked and respected. working on teams that I felt a connection with, and getting new opportunities. So moving from WorldPay, part of this big FIS organization, to Molly was an opportunity for me to get exposure to kind of a more of a scale up environment and see what that was like. But I think it's one of the things I always say to people if I get asked for career advice, you've got to think about what's an option expander for you. So if you're taking a role, is it an option expander or is it an option limiter? And I think one of the things I've been trying to keep as a North Star with these roles is what is an option expander, right? And I don't think you can go wrong as long as you're continually either deciding to be a specialist and really being strategic about that, or it's okay to take roles that aren't exactly in a linear path for you as long as it's expanding your options.
I love that. That's already a nugget right there. Is it an option limiter, option expander? Because to your point, then you also think differently about the companies that you are interviewing for or having conversations with within your network. It's a different way of thinking as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And we know that BigCommerce was probably in that cusp of expanding into Europe as well. So did that transpire then? Option expander, is that what led to that opportunity?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity, I had worked with the BigCommerce exec team since I was at WorldPay. So I had familiarity with my boss, with the exec team, with some of the European team, and had an opportunity to move across initially to work on the Europe business, but then stepped into a GM payments role and having a broader business development lens. And that for me was, this notion of having a GM seat where you're running a P&L, you're a business owner, you're making those key decisions. That was really attractive to me because I had been in financial analysis roles, strategy roles, partnership roles, but this pure P&L, setting yourself on as a GM role on the path to being a CEO, running something bigger was something that I really wanted to do. So that's been a really fun, challenging, fun experience, and something that I did feel exactly was an option expander for me going forward and putting me on the path to continuing to lead businesses, lead big teams, have revenue impact, and things that I wanted to do.
What do you think have been the biggest challenges that you've faced so far? So just reflecting back on all the roles where you just thought, I don't think I'm going to come out of this, apart from being made redundant. But what was the biggest challenge for you where you sort of thought, I don't think there's a way out here?
Yeah, I think some roles were very demanding hours wise. Certainly working at Goldman and at Bain, it can be really hard to be working in a job where when you go in the morning at 9, you're not sure if you're going to go home at 7 or you're going to go home at 1 a.m. Right. And I think that actually a lot of companies in the intervening years have made a lot of strides on improving work-life balance and trying to limit work hours, especially for junior staff. But that lack of consistency was always a bit intimidating to me. And also just the pressure, there's nothing that compares to being at Bain and doing a 2-week diligence and having 2 weeks to basically understand a business and then present back to people who know a lot more about it than you do as a subject matter expert. And so the pressure of producing slides analysis every day that's then reviewed in front of a lot of people, right? Like having your work really publicly criticized, not in a mean way, but just in a constructive way was hard initially, but then I started to really love it and feel that was a really collaborative way of working. So
yeah, it builds resilience, isn't it, as well?
It is. And actually, I've noticed that sometimes I can really freak out the juniors on my team now if I leave a lot of comments on things and they think, oh gosh, she's editing these things and she's making comments and asking me to change it. And my view is we're just trying to improve a product, right? We're trying to deliver a message to an exec pack or to a client. And it's not about right or wrong. It's about how do we get this across in the most clear way possible. But I think the hours and the time sensitivity, the sense of urgency is hard about some of those jobs. And then the kind of consistent challenge that I think everyone has in large global orgs is working cross-functionally, especially with people that you're not co-located with and who are from different cultures, have different backgrounds, many of whom have been working in an industry for longer than you've been alive, right? Which is always true in payments. There's so many people that are such subject matter experts. And how do you build rapport, relate, influence people that don't report to you and don't have to do what you're asking them to do or for help? And I think that is really challenging. I've improved on it a lot over the years, but certainly something that I'm always looking to improve how I can work well cross-functionally across a big org, across time zones.
That's a very big one, I think, and a game changer in terms of how work culture has changed over the years, because a lot of businesses are based in different territories, countries, time zones. So you're dealing with culture nuances, trying to understand how your colleague from a different department is trying to articulate themselves to you, what they actually mean when they say, yes, I can do it. Do they actually mean that? Are they being polite, or do we have to have different conversations as well? I think has been the biggest learning is embracing that, but learning how to influence people who don't really directly report into you. They don't really have to do what you're saying, but it meets the common goal, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think Slack is just the worst thing ever invented because, and I do it too. Like, you can shoot off a Slack, you're standing in line for a coffee, you're in between them, and it can come across more terse or more cheery or more harsh than you expected. And you can also read people's messages totally different. If you and I had a text conversation, if I'm in a certain mindset, I could read into everything you say to me in a certain way. And so I really do try to pick up the phone. And even just, having Zooms or catching people for a few minutes, it's so much easier than having a 40, entry exchange on Slack and feeling that you are being a bit grumpy with me about me asking you this thing. So it is really tough to have these quick pieces of communication where you don't have someone's full attention and you're not really sure how they are feeling or whether you're reading into something unnecessarily.
And it also comes from the fact that in terms of etiquette lessons coming from way back, those have existed for how to articulate and how to communicate in person. Those have probably existed in terms of letter writing, showing my age now. But one of the things that has never been introduced, and probably someone can make a killing for that, is etiquette for Slack, WhatsApp, emails. That does not exist anyway. There is no training. There is no nuances of messaging, how things come across. It feels like it's the wild, wild west at the moment from a personal and professional perspective. That you're right. Having just a 2-minute conversation to say, just pick your brain on this, X, Y, and Z. Were you thinking in the same direction, or is this not what you were thinking as well? Just saves loads of messages. Yeah.
And the context, I think the context is so important. If I send you a message and say, hey, until, it's Friday afternoon, I need this for you. I need you to do this for me by the end of the day. That's so different than if I call you and I say, oh my gosh, I got asked by our CEO to prepare something. He's going into a meeting in 3 hours. Can you give me 2 bullets on X? And like, the full context is you and I both know this is an urgent request that's not standard, and helping you understand why I'm asking you this thing that's out of ordinary on a Friday afternoon. I think the full context verbally can just make a big difference versus, hey, I need this from you.
And it comes back to what you've been talking about all along, which I sort of want to dive into, is networking and building that. And how do you, if we're talking to a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old, 50-year-old, I've noticed now that a lot of good roles, even for myself, have not come through things that have been advertised. It's been through my network that I've built over years, over time. You connect the dots and somehow someone says, actually, there's something interesting here. Let's have a chat about it. How important, and I know it's played a very important role in the thread of your career, but how do you build the ability to network and build those connections over time and over the years?
Yeah, I think it's really practice. So there's a couple things. One is find someone in your industry or your desired industry on LinkedIn who seems like they're out at events, meeting people, doing things. Like, I think understand where you need to be to meet people that are going to be in your current or future network. So a great example is I have a friend who's currently looking for a new role in tech. She comes from a retail background. So she was at the retail technology show for 2 days, walking around, meeting people in London. I think you have to train yourself to be able to go up to people, to have conversations, to attend panels, there's so many free events out there. There's, especially within tech and FinTech, there's always companies having happy hours, information days, partner days. There's a lot of things. You can also reach out to people for coffee, right? Because as you mentioned, I feel so indebted to my network for all the opportunities I've had. I've had a bunch of people reach out and say, hey, could I get a coffee? Or could I do a 30-minute call with you? I'm looking at finding a role like yours. And I try to do it, right? Because so many people have made that time for me, but you can't do it from your sofa. And I know that's like a very cliche thing to say, but it's really getting out there and going to events and walking up to people, which is really scary, but it gets easier. And saying, hey, I'm Michaela. I work in payments. I'm really interested in learning about how you run your payments team, or, some of the challenges you're facing as a brand, and trying to unpack that. So it's pushing yourself out there, but find people who are doing what you want to do and see where they're going and see the people they talk to. LinkedIn is an amazing tool. Well, you can get through some garbage on LinkedIn, but LinkedIn can be a really good tool, to see what people are out and about doing and kind of start to plot that. Even if you have a very internally facing role, it's really important to have an external network. You don't want to be in a situation where something's changed, you all of a sudden feel that you need to apply for a new job, and you're just starting to build that network. You need the network already there.
And it takes time, isn't it? Getting out of your comfort zone, taking that first step to reach out to someone, have a conversation. And you know what the biggest thing I've realized? We're all human. Some doors might close, some people might not respond. You keep it moving. On to the next one is a good mentality to happen. And I love the fact that you are paying it forward, because you're remembering how the opportunities have supported you and helped you as well. And lifting others up is a great way to do that too. Let's talk about you and just being the woman empowerer that you are. I mean, you are one of the FT partners of Women in FinTech Rising Stars. How are you empowering women in the industry? And you talked about you've been to an event recently as well where that was an opportunity. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So just this week, actually, I was asked to be on a panel at a Barclays Women in Sales event. And so Barclays has an amazing group of colleagues, actually a lot male colleagues who are allies, but for women in their sales teams, they were celebrating some of the women had been nominated for an industry award and hosting a panel, hosting networking. And I think for larger companies, it's so important. I mean, any company of any size, but just to see the real slickness which they produced this event, how everyone was so supportive, especially having senior male managing directors there, executive sponsors, male colleagues and allies. Just really amazing to see the support they have for women who are in sales, which can be a traditionally more male-dominated industry, especially in payments and fintech. So I thought that was super nice. And certainly for some organizations that are setting up women's groups, I think the stigma of being in a women's network has actually faded a little bit. I think you and I talked about this. People recognize that actually it's so empowering to your internal teams to be able to connect with one another, to have those spaces to network, to have really open discussions. And male colleagues can also be involved and are a really important part of that. And so I'm a huge advocate of both internal in your organization, but if you have a small organization, there's also other external opportunities, whether it's women in payments, women in FinTech groups. I think there's a women in ecom group that does kind of meetups once a quarter where people come and basically meet at a bar or somewhere social. There's fitness classes I've seen on LinkedIn for people to get together. So really it's about lifting people up, empowering them, and just sharing your own experience. I think that's really powerful, especially for women who are in industries that are less well represented, to kind of talk more frankly about your career path, some of the challenges you faced and some of your successes.
I think also post-pandemic, where it was an extraordinary situation where a lot of people were working alone, remotely, everyone is craving connection in terms of whether it's professional, personal, meeting up people, coming with your authentic self in terms of the challenges that you're facing. I love the fact, and we're involved in the Women's Accelerator program, which is to mentor 6 founders of businesses, and they're also young and they've started businesses and they're driving 6-figure sales. And I was just really so proud that, I mean, at their age and what they're doing, to be able to say, you know what, we're reaching out, we know we need support, and we're able to bring all these women together and have our male allies and provide the support and give them the space to ask the questions. There are no stupid questions, isn't it? Whether it's supply chain, strategy, funding. You know, it was like a full circle moment for me, us being in that room and saying, wow, we are paying it forward now and helping others in that way. It's brilliant.
It was, and that's the Women's Domain Accelerator, and we have an amazing group of brands. I think one thing happened in that room, which you may not remember, but one of the brand founders introduced herself, and she's doing, I think, $2 or $3 million in sales, and she's primarily selling through wholesale channels now. And she sort of introduced herself and then immediately apologized and said, I haven't been doing very much direct to consumer. I know I haven't focused on it. I'm really behind. And you stopped her and you said, hold on, don't introduce yourself and immediately apologize to us for what you haven't done. You're crushing it. You're running this amazing brand basically by yourself, doing $3 million of sales. Like, can you just stop for a second and acknowledge how exceptional that is and what a superstar you are? And I think that's also something that I notice a lot for women is even when they're really successful, they spend so much time focused on what they haven't done or where they feel they need to focus more. And it's really one of the things I loved about the Accelerator kickoff is just having a group of women and some of the men who are supporting the program sitting and like celebrating these amazing female entrepreneurs who have put so much blood, sweat, and tears into these businesses, and they're doing so well. And, you know, for us to be able to support them in taking their business to the next level.
Yeah, I think if there's always one tip I share with women is never start with apologizing. You've got like your 5 minutes to pitch yourself, your brand, your personal brand, lead with the positive, and then everything else. That's what we want people to remember as well. Work-life balance. I know, is it a thing? I listened to Emma Greed, who's obviously an amazing CEO of many businesses from Good American to Skims. And she was like, there ain't no balance. I'm a mother. I'm a CEO. I'm leading businesses. I am being the best at what I can be in whatever situation I am in the time. And that resonated with me because in terms of building a career, it's all about decisions that you have to make and realizing that you're going to be great at some things, you're going to fall down on others, and it's because you're making different decisions at different points in your career. Yeah. What does even balance mean to you, and how do you take the time outside of work to fill your cup?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the notion of balance is also probably fictional. So I like to think about being overweight and underweight certain things. One of my former leaders at Goldman would talk about that, where this week, you know, she's got a big presentation. She's kind of overweight work, a little underweight on family. And, you know, you have a partner who can step in, support, you have external childcare, other people that you're relying on. And then some weeks you're more overweight, you know, personal or family, underweight work. and you just kind of need to make sure that portions are probably okay. I think it's really hard. I mean, for me, the way that I have found the most kind of peace with working in what is quite a demanding role and often having a lot of late night calls and travel is to really try to have some schedule autonomy, which is, I recognize, a privilege and not always possible for people. But for example, I really try to avoid having recurring calls on Fridays. So I can leave that time open to catch up with the team if there's something that's urgent, to kind of get through as much as my inbox as I can, to do things like this, to try to do some things that are kind of extra 10% of things that I'm doing outside my role. But it's really hard. And I think some weeks I'm really frustrated with my lack of ability to turn off. And sometimes if I'm on calls until 11 at night, if you're on big calls, you're making presentations, it takes a while to come down from that, right? And then it kind of bleeds into the next day if you've got something early. So it's a constant battle. I definitely don't think I have it figured out. But if I know I have a few late nights of calls, I try to start later one morning. I have some ladies in my neighborhood that I walk dogs with at 8 a.m. some mornings. So I try to make sure I do that. But really just finding some time for yourself. And I work less on weekends than I used to. That used to be a real problem for me, or a challenge, especially when I was at Goldman, is working over the weekend. And that starts to feel like you don't have time to really recharge. But it's a huge challenge. I mean, I'm always taking tips. And I would say my inbox is one of the things that I sacrifice for trying, I definitely don't get through all my email every day, and I really try hard, but sometimes people have to chase me. And I think at least my team knows it's not malicious. If they need to chase me, sometimes I just don't see things, or I just haven't circled back to it. So I do try to be better and more responsive, but there's only so much you can do if you have, 6 hours of planned calls a day, plus you're getting 100 Slacks, plus you're getting 200 emails. So you got to give and take a little bit on a daily basis.
And small steps over time, isn't it? It's not something to solve right away. And I think just giving people who are listening to the podcast the notion that nobody's perfect. We're all sort of battling and putting things into quadrants, isn't it? Urgent, non-urgent, non-important. What I need to do now, what's important for this step in my career. It's finding not the balance, but understanding it's all in small increments over time.
And one of the things that I have really tried to put into practice is there's a book by a guy called Cal Newport called Slow Productivity. And it's basically about how if you spend your day working on inbox 0, you're probably never going to get your big strategic projects done. And it's not going to occur in the 7 minutes you get back when a call ends early, right? You're not going to work on that big 20-page presentation or the strategy report or the importance of really carving out large blocks of time for execution of important projects. And I've really tried to put that into practice where it doesn't always work, but if I have a big presentation coming up, I'm presenting to our exec leadership team, to the board, that I have, a couple 3-hour blocks of work to sit down and work through something. And I'm turning off my Slack and I'm putting an away message on and flipping my phone over, because I get an email every 2 minutes, as I'm sure you do. Yeah. So if I'm sitting here with everything open, it's it's just so much easier to think, I'm just going to do this. It will just take me a minute, but then you never have the time for the big strategic stuff. So that's something that I'm really trying to work on, but it is a work in progress.
I totally agree. I've embraced time blocking, and the stats on that seem to have paid dividends, that actually blocking time in your calendar, in your diary, to say, I am focusing on this particular task and completing it is so beneficial, because, they say the average human has an attention span, even listening to a presentation, 15 minutes, and then they're gone. Which is why people love an executive summary, isn't it? Sort of summarizing everything at the beginning. But having those instances to time block and say, I'm going to complete this task and finish it. And it gives you a sense of accomplishment, isn't it? Otherwise, you're chasing your inbox, you're chasing your Slacks, your WhatsApp messages. It's just relentless and definitely leads to burnout and just anxiety and feeling that you're not a high performer in whatever role you're in at that point.
The thing that I do use, because sometimes I struggle, it can be really daunting to sit down in front of your desk and say that you're going to work for 2 hours. So I use a Pomodoro timer sometimes, which is 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. And I have an app that I downloaded for free. I think there's a bunch of them out there. And for whatever reason, mentally for me, 25 minutes feels more realistic.
Yeah.
Right. And like I can sit with this. And so I set my little timer, I flip my phone over, and then it's like 25 minutes on this outline or this presentation. And then I can go make a cup of tea, come back. But that is a little bit easier for me than facing down 120 minutes of needing to get something done and just not knowing where to start.
I have a classic Sandor, so I turn it and then I did. That's like probably does take about 20, 25 minutes. But it's something visual, something there that I've set my eye on and knowing, okay, when it rings, coffee, stretch legs, and then go again if necessary. So that's already a good tip out there. It's so interesting, isn't it? Do you find the higher you've risen in your positions, C-suite, senior VP, you have to be more tactical in terms of how you are a good leader and how you complete tasks, how you delegate. That's come with experience over time. It's not something that we learned off the bat, isn't it?
It is. And I think delegation is really key. And it's also key to have, and I've been so lucky to have direct reports and people on my teams who are really capable at picking things up. And I do, sometimes just forward stuff over and say, please, can you
on with this?
handle this? And that's really critical. So I think just relieving yourself of the notion that you need to do everything. And sometimes things don't get done the way you want them to, and you don't give clear enough instructions, and that sits on me, right? But it is really important to be able to delegate, to your point on maintaining some kind of balance and also focusing on priorities. But you need to kind of coach and empower your team to be able to execute that on your behalf. And that's really important.
So circling back, you have already shared so many tips and nuggets and snippets for the audience. What are 3 Trailblazer takeaway tips? If you were to summarize and give advice to someone who's listening to help them with their professional and personal career journey, what would they be?
Sure. My first would be, when you're looking at a new role, is it an option expander or an option limiter? My second would be to be brave when you're networking. Send that LinkedIn note to someone, inviting them for a coffee, asking them for a call, go to an event, walk up to people, introduce yourself, connect with them on LinkedIn, follow up. And my third would be to really prioritize your time and make sure that you're working on things that are getting you closer to where you want to be in your career, and being vocal about what you want and setting those plans with your manager, and making sure that you're holding yourself to account on delivering that.
I've really enjoyed this chat. I feel a warm and
Antola.
fuzziness.
Me too.
Option limiter, option expander. I will be using that a lot. It's been my biggest takeaway. Yeah.
It's a good one. Well, thank you so much for
joining the podcast. I think what's been really great is you've had a very interesting career journey. I think you need to pat yourself on the back of all that you've achieved. And you're all about paying it forward. You're all about women empowerment. You're all about empowering even our male allies in the industry. And that shines through. I've met you, I think, a few times, and that really shines through in how you present yourself and bringing that to light. So thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me.
That has been the Trailblazers Experience podcast. As always, we're inviting you to follow, share, and subscribe. And until next time, thank you very much.